A transatlantic airliner, hours into its journey, made a sudden U-turn over the Atlantic Ocean. The cause was not a mechanical failure, a medical emergency, or a security threat. It was a single quiet phone call made by a passenger in seat 2A. Dr. Robert Hayes, a brilliant scientist and devoted single father, had been relentlessly harassed by a flight attendant who believed he didn't belong in her first-class cabin. She pushed him too far. She had no idea the man she chose to humiliate held the power to ground her plane, a power that would not only end her career in an instant, but would trigger a twist of fate so cruelly precise it would shatter her entire world. The first-class cabin of Global Skyways, Flight 118 from JFK to London Heathrow, was a sanctuary of muted tones and hushed efficiency. The gentle clinking of crystal on porcelain, the soft murmur of conversations about stock options and summer homes in the Hamptons, and the plush, cream-colored leather of the pod-like seats all worked in concert to create an atmosphere of serene exclusivity. It was a world away from the controlled chaos of the main terminal. Into this world stepped Dr. Robert Hayes, his hand holding the much smaller, trusting hand of his 8-year-old daughter, Maya. Robert was a man whose presence was usually one of quiet authority. In his late 30s, he had a lean, athletic build that spoke of disciplined early morning runs. His eyes, dark and intelligent, held the focused calm of a man accustomed to solving impossibly complex problems. Today, however, they were softened with paternal warmth. He wore a simple but well-tailored navy blue blazer over a crisp white shirt, understated yet elegant. "Wow, Daddy," Maya whispered, her eyes wide as she took in her seat, which looked more like a spaceship command module than anything she'd ever sat in. "It's so big," Robert smiled, his heart swelling. "Only the best for my best girl." He helped her buckle the ridiculously oversized seatbelt, his large surgeon's hands gentle and sure. "Big adventure, remember?" The trip was twofold. Primarily, he was the keynote speaker at the European Neurological Symposium in London, a massive honor. He was set to present his team's groundbreaking research on bacteriophage therapy for treating aggressive, antibiotic-resistant brain tumors. But just as importantly, it was a special trip for Maya. Her mother, Chloe, had passed away 2 years prior after a sudden illness, and the world had been a little less bright for both of them since. This trip, a daddy-daughter adventure, to see the sights of London after his conference, was his attempt to paint some of that color back into their lives. Nestled in the footwell of his seat, secured in a specially designed temperature-controlled briefcase, was the secondary reason for the trip. It wasn't just his research data, it was a live, cryo-preserved phage culture from his lab at Ethelred Biologics. A custom-engineered sample destined for a critical, last-ditch experimental procedure at a London hospital. The briefcase, marked only with a discrete biohazard symbol and a series of alphanumeric codes, was his constant companion. Its contents were, quite literally, priceless. As they settled in, a flight attendant approached their pod. She was an older woman, perhaps in her late 50s, with meticulously coiffed, blonde hair that seemed immovable and a smile that didn't quite reach her pale blue eyes. Her name tag read, Brenda. She moved with an air of practiced ownership, as if the first-class cabin were her personal living room and the passengers were guests on probation. She offered pre-departure drinks. Her gaze lingered on Robert and Maya for a fraction of a second too long, a flicker of something, assessment, perhaps confusion in her eyes before she plastered the professional smile back on. Robert, used to being the only black face in many professional settings, recognized the look. It was the subtle, almost imperceptible pause he'd encountered his whole life. He ordered an orange juice for Maya and a sparkling water for himself. Brenda delivered the drinks with brisk efficiency. "Your boarding passes, please," she said, her tone clipped. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. Robert retrieved them from his blazer pocket. "Here you go." Brenda took them, her eyes scanning the names. Dr. Robert Hayes, Maya Hayes, and the seat numbers, 2A and 2B. She looked from the passes to Robert, then back again. The silence stretched. "Is there a problem?" Robert asked, his voice even. "Just confirming," she said, handing them back. Her smile was gone. She turned and walked away without another word. Robert exchanged a look with Maya. He gave her a reassuring wink, but a small, familiar knot of unease tightened in his stomach. He'd paid for these tickets with his own hard-earned money. He was a distinguished professional. Yet, in that one interaction, he had been made to feel like an interloper. He pushed the feeling down. He would not let this woman's attitude spoil this trip for his daughter. "Daddy, is that lady mad at us?" Maya asked, her voice small. "No, sweetie," Robert said, stroking her hair. "She's just very busy making sure everyone is safe. Now, which movie are you going to watch first?" He successfully distracted her with the in-flight entertainment system, but he couldn't distract himself. He watched Brenda as she moved through the cabin, laughing with the older white couple in 1A and 1B, offering a refill to the businessman in 3D with a warm, genuine smile. The contrast was stark and unsettling. 15 minutes later, as the last of the first-class passengers were settling in, Brenda returned. She was holding a tablet computer. "Sir," she began, not looking at Maya, her focus entirely on Robert. "I'm going to need to see your identification." Robert blinked. "I just showed you our boarding passes." "Yes, I know. I need to see your ID. A driver's license or passport," she insisted. Her voice was louder now, drawing the attention of the passenger in the adjacent pod, a woman with sharp, observant eyes who subtly angled her body to listen better. "Why?" Robert asked, his patience beginning to fray. He was acutely aware of Maya, who had paused her movie and was watching them, her brow furrowed with worry. "It's a random security check, sir," Brenda said, the words sounding rehearsed and hollow. "Airline policy." Robert knew it was no such thing. He'd flown first class dozens of times for conferences around the world. He'd never been asked for his ID after his boarding pass was accepted in the cabin. It was a targeted act of suspicion, and he knew exactly what it was based on. A black man and his child in the most expensive seats on the plane? To her, it simply didn't add up. He felt a flash of hot anger, but suppressed it for Maya's sake. He would comply. He would be the model passenger. He reached into his carry-on, retrieved his wallet, and produced his New York driver's license. He handed it to her. She took it and stared at it. Her lips pursed. She typed something into her tablet. The silence was thick with tension. The woman in the next pod, whose name he would later learn was Sarah Jenkins, a freelance journalist, had now put down her magazine entirely. "Dr. Robert Hayes," Brenda read aloud, a hint of surprise or perhaps skepticism in her tone. "Thank you." She handed the license back, the plastic clicking against his thumbnail. She gave him one last, searching look before turning on her heel and marching back towards the galley. Robert took a deep breath, trying to release the tension coiling in his shoulders. He looked at Maya, whose lower lip was trembling slightly. "It's okay, baby girl," he murmured, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "Everything is fine. Just a silly rule." But it wasn't fine. The quiet hum of privilege had been replaced by the loud, grating siren of prejudice, and Robert had a sinking feeling that this was far from over. The cabin doors were sealed, the safety demonstration video played, and the massive aircraft began its lumbering taxi toward the runway. Robert did his best to project an aura of calm for Maya, pointing out the other planes and the scurrying ground crew, turning it all into a part of their grand adventure. Inside, however, he was a tempest of controlled fury. The humiliation stung, but it was the look of fear in his daughter's eyes that truly enraged him. He had built a life and a career on intellect, discipline, and merit. He had striven to create a world for Maya where she would be judged by her character and abilities, not the color of her skin. Yet here they were, in a metal tube miles above the ground, and that old, ugly poison had seeped in. As the plane leveled off at its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, the seatbelt sign pinged off. The cabin crew began their service, a meticulously choreographed dance of hot towels, champagne flutes, and hushed inquiries about dinner choices. Brenda seemed to deliberately avoid their pod, sending a younger, nervous-looking flight attendant named Kevin to take their meal orders. Robert was just starting to think the ordeal was over. He was wrong. About an hour into the flight, after they had finished their meals, Brenda reappeared. This time she wasn't alone. She had Kevin with her, who looked deeply uncomfortable, his eyes darting everywhere but at Robert. Sir, Brenda said, her voice steely, devoid of any pretense of customer service, we've had a discrepancy reported with the payment for these seats. Robert stared at her dumbfounded. A discrepancy? What are you talking about? These tickets were booked and paid for weeks ago through my corporate travel agent, American Express Global Business Travel. There is no discrepancy. Our system is flagging the transaction as suspicious, Brenda countered, her chin jutting out. We need to verify the card used for the purchase. I'll need to see the credit card and your identification again. This was it, the point of no return. This wasn't a security check or a system glitch. This was a direct, baseless accusation of fraud. It was a public shaming. The businessman across the aisle was now openly staring. Sarah Jenkins, the journalist, had subtly positioned her phone on her lap, the screen dark. Robert knew what she was doing. No, Robert said, his voice dangerously low and calm. The word hung in the air, a stark refusal in a space that demanded compliance. Brenda's eyes widened slightly. I beg your pardon? I said no. I have shown you my boarding pass. I have shown you my identification. I will not be subject to a third round of interrogation in front of my daughter because you have a personal issue with my presence here. You are harassing me. If you have a legitimate problem, you can take it up with the captain. Otherwise, I would ask you to leave us alone. Maya had started crying silently, tears tracking down her cheeks as she clutched her stuffed bear. Barnaby. Robert placed a comforting hand on her knee, his touch gentle despite the rage simmering within him. Sir, Brenda's voice rose, her face flushing in ugly mottled red. If you refuse to comply with the requests of the cabin crew, I can have you restrained and arrested upon landing. You are jeopardizing the security of this flight. I am doing no such thing, Robert shot back, his voice rising to match hers, though it retained a core of steely control. You are. You are creating a disturbance. You are baselessly accusing a passenger of theft. You are traumatizing a child. You are the one jeopardizing this flight. Kevin, the junior attendant, finally spoke up, his voice quavering. Brenda, maybe we should just call the purser. I am the purser, Kevin, she snapped, not taking her eyes off Robert. This is my cabin and my responsibility. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a venomous hiss. I don't know who you think you are or how you got these tickets, but people like you don't just end up in first class. I will find out, and I will have you removed. The slur was unspoken, but deafeningly clear. People like you. A switch flipped in Robert's mind. The anger, which he had so carefully contained, now crystallized into something cold, hard, and decisive. He had tried politeness. He had tried compliance. He had tried firm refusal. Now he would try something else entirely. This woman, in her blind prejudice, had no idea the hornet's nest she was kicking. She thought he was a powerless man in a fancy seat. She was about to learn just how catastrophically wrong she was. He looked past her, his gaze sweeping the cabin, at the staring faces, at his weeping daughter. He then met Brenda's hateful glare with an unnerving calm. You are making a monumental mistake, he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. You have left me no choice. Please inform the captain that I need to make an urgent and time-sensitive satellite phone call. It concerns the viability of a Class 4 biological asset currently on board this aircraft. Brenda stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. A what? What kind of nonsense are you talking about now? It's not nonsense, Robert said, his eyes like chips of obsidian. It's a matter of national importance. Now, if you'll excuse me, you're upsetting my daughter. He turned his body slightly, presenting Brenda with his shoulder, and focused all his attention on Maya, wiping her tears with his thumb. It's okay, sweetie. Daddy's going to fix this now. The journalist, Sarah Jenkins, typed furiously into her phone. The businessman looked bewildered. Kevin looked terrified. And Brenda, for the first time, looked uncertain. The sheer, unshakable authority in Robert's voice had finally pierced her thick hide of self-righteousness. She had wanted to know who he was. She was about to get her answer. Brenda stood frozen for a moment, thrown completely off balance. Robert's shift from defensive anger to icy, authoritative command was disorienting. Class 4 biological asset and national importance. were phrases so far outside her script of dealing with difficult passengers that she couldn't immediately process them. Her mind scrambled for a foothold. Was he bluffing? Was he delusional? That's absurd, she finally stammered, trying to regain control. Passengers are not permitted to make satellite calls. It's against regulations. There are protocols for exceptions, Robert replied without looking at her, his attention still on comforting Maya. Protocol Omega-7 in this specific case. I suggest you consult with your captain. His name is David Foster, according to the pre-flight announcement. Tell him Dr. Robert Hayes in Seat 2A needs to initiate Protocol Omega-7. Tell him the call is to Dr. Alistair Finch in London. He'll understand. The sheer specificity of his words, the protocol name, the captain's name, the recipient of the call, was like a series of targeted blows against her certainty. Doubt began to creep in. This was not the language of a common criminal. Seeing her hesitation, Kevin, the junior attendant, made a decision. I'll go get the captain, he mumbled and scurried away towards the cockpit before Brenda could stop him. Left alone, Brenda's bravado began to crumble, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. What if he was telling the truth? The consequences of interfering with something of national importance would be catastrophic for her career. The 30 years she had dedicated to this airline, the seniority she guarded so jealously, could evaporate in an instant. A few minutes later, a man in a crisp white pilot's uniform with 4 stripes on the shoulder emerged from the cockpit. Captain David Foster was in his early 50s, with a weathered, competent face and an air of no-nonsense calm. He walked directly to Seat 2A, his eyes assessing the situation. Robert, calm and composed, Maya, tear-streaked and frightened, and Brenda looking flustered and defensive. "Dr. Hayes," Captain Foster said, his voice a calm baritone. "I'm Captain Foster. My first officer received a message from my purser. There seems to be a situation." "Captain," Robert said, finally looking up. He met the pilot's gaze directly. "My apologies for this disruption. I am traveling with a time-sensitive medical asset for a critical procedure at the Royal Marsden Hospital in London. The viability of this asset is measured in hours. Due to what I can only describe as sustained and targeted harassment from your purser, Ms. Jensen, I now have serious concerns that we will be met by security upon landing." He paused, letting the words sink in. Such a delay, even for 30 minutes, would render the asset useless. This would have severe consequences, not only for the patient, but potentially for international relations. The patient is the minor child of a senior EU diplomat. Therefore, I must make a call to my colleague in London to update him on the situation and have him initiate contingency plans. Captain Foster's expression became grim. He glanced at the discreet, high-tech briefcase at Robert's feet. He then turned his gaze to Brenda. "Ms. Jensen, is this true? Did you accuse this passenger of fraud?" I was following security procedures," Brenda said weakly. "His presence here was anomalous." "Anomalous?" the captain repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Ms. Jensen, this man is a passenger in a seat he paid for. That is the only thing that should concern you. Go to the galley and wait for me." Brenda's face turned ashen. She opened her mouth to argue, saw the iron look in the captain's eyes, and closed it. Wordlessly, she turned and made the long walk of shame back to the galley, feeling the curious stares of every passenger on her back. Captain Foster knelt by Robert's seat. "Dr. Hayes, on behalf of Global Skyways, I am deeply sorry. Please give me one moment." He returned to the cockpit. The passengers murmured amongst themselves, the cabin thick with speculation. Sarah Jenkins was now openly taking notes in a small reporter's pad. 5 minutes later, the captain returned with a satellite phone handset. "The line is secure and patched through to our ground control. Who will connect you?" he said respectfully. "You have priority clearance. Take as long as you need." Robert nodded his thanks. He took the phone. "Maya, sweetie, can you put your headphones on for Daddy for just a minute? A really loud movie, okay?" Maya, seeing the captain's deference to her father, had calmed down. She nodded and did as she was told. Robert dialed the number from memory. After a single ring, a crisp British voice answered. "Finch. Alistair, it's Robert Hayes." "Robert, you're in the air, I trust. Everything on schedule?" "Negative, Alistair. We have a problem. An obstruction." Robert's voice was pure, dispassionate business. I have an unprofessional and hostile crew member who has made it her mission to question my validity on this flight. I believe she may try to have port security detain me upon arrival. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Detain you? Are you serious? For God's sake, Robert, the window on the culture is already tight. A delay of even an hour would be catastrophic. I know, Robert interrupted smoothly. That's why I'm calling. We are currently over the Atlantic, approximately 3 hours from Heathrow. I can no longer guarantee the integrity of the transfer if we continue on this flight path under these conditions. The risk of a ground delay is too high. My God, Alistair muttered. The secretary is here at the hospital already. The surgical team is on standby. What do you propose? This was the moment. Robert took a breath. Alistair, I need you to make a call. I need you to get me off this plane. Not in London. Now. I need you to ground this flight. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Ground it? Robert, that's a commercial airliner. I am aware, Robert said, his voice flat. Consider the alternative. A failed procedure, a diplomatic incident, a dead child. This is a direct result of the airline's employee. The liability is theirs. Tell them to turn this plane around and head for the nearest suitable airfield. Gander, maybe. Or back to Boston. I will transfer to a private charter from there. It's the only way to guarantee the asset arrives on time and without interference. Ground the flight? Alistair sounded both horrified and impressed. Good Lord, all right, Robert, stay on the line. Robert could hear muffled, urgent conversation in the background. Words like Downing Street, FAA liaison, and emergency clearance. A minute passed. It felt like an eternity. Robert, Alistair's voice was back, tense and electric. It's done. A call has been made to the British Civil Aviation Authority, who are liaising with the FAA. They are contacting the Operations Center for Global Skyways as we speak. You were right. No one is willing to take the risk. Your captain should be receiving a message momentarily. They're diverting you. At that exact moment, a chime sounded in the cockpit, the unmistakable signal of an urgent ACARS message from the ground. Captain Foster, who had been standing by respectfully, hurried back to the flight deck. Robert spoke into the phone. Thank you, Alistair. I'll be in touch from the ground. He disconnected the call and handed the phone back to the flight attendant, Kevin, who looked at him with a mixture of awe and terror. A few moments later, the captain's voice came over the PA system, tight and strained. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to unforeseen operational requirements, we are unable to continue our flight to London at this time. We will be diverting to Logan International Airport in Boston. We will be on the ground in approximately 45 minutes. Cabin crew, please prepare the cabin for landing. I apologize for the inconvenience. A wave of confused, angry groans swept through the entire plane. People were on their way to business meetings, to funerals, to weddings, but in first class there was only stunned silence. They had all witnessed the cause. The plane began a slow, graceful bank, turning back towards the North American coast. Robert looked out the window at the vast, indifferent ocean below. He had not wanted this. He had not sought this confrontation, but he had finished it. He looked at Maya, who was now peacefully watching her movie, oblivious to the fact that her father had just bent the multi-billion-dollar airline industry to his will, all to protect her and to deliver on a promise. The descent into Boston was surreal. The mood in the cabin had shifted from confused anger to a tense, simmering curiosity. Every passenger on that aircraft, from the last row in economy to the front of first class, knew this wasn't a mechanical issue or a weather diversion. They knew it was because of the quiet black man in seat 2A. Whispers and rumors flew. Was he a spy? A government official? A witness under protection? The truth, as is often the case, was both simpler and more complex. Sarah Jenkins, the journalist, was no longer pretending to be discreet. Her notebook was open, her pen flying across the page. She knew this was more than just a human interest story about racism on a plane. It was about the hidden levers of power that operate just beneath the surface of everyday life. As the plane touched down at Logan Airport with a jarring thud, the true fallout began. Before the seatbelt sign was even switched off, the plane was directed to a remote, isolated stand, far from the main terminals. A fleet of black SUVs with tinted windows was already waiting on the tarmac, their presence a stark and official statement. Captain Foster's voice came over the PA again, this time with a note of weary resignation. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. We are being met by airport officials. Please remain calm." The cabin door opened, but it wasn't a jet bridge that connected. A set of rolling stairs was pushed against the fuselage. The first person to board was not a paramedic or a police officer. He was a man in an impeccably tailored suit, his face a mask of grim urgency. He was flanked by two stern-looking airport security officials. "Captain Foster," the man in the suit said, his voice carrying through the silent cabin, "I'm Richard Sterling, Vice President of North American Operations for Global Skyways." He didn't even glance at the other passengers. His eyes scanned the first-class cabin and landed immediately on Robert Hayes. He walked directly to him, his expression one of profound apology. "Dr. Hayes," Sterling said, his voice low and earnest, "on behalf of the entire airline, from our CEO down, I am unreservedly sorry for the treatment you have received on this flight. It is inexcusable and unacceptable." He then turned, his face hardening as he looked toward the galley. "Ms. Jensen, a word." Brenda emerged from the galley, her face pale and drawn. The confident, imperious woman from a few hours ago was gone, replaced by someone small, frightened, and utterly defeated. "Your employment with Global Skyways is terminated, effective immediately," Sterling said, his voice cold and clinical, leaving no room for argument. "Your credentials and ID are revoked. You will be escorted from the airport. Your personal effects will be shipped to you. Do you understand?" Brenda swayed slightly, her hand flying to her mouth. 30 years, she whispered, her voice cracking. "I have given this company 30 years of my life. And you've undone it all in 3 hours," Sterling retorted, his voice laced with ice. "You have not only exposed this airline to immense legal and financial liability, you have jeopardized a mission of international importance and brought shame upon all of us. Security will escort you off the plane. Now." Two of the uniformed officials stepped forward. They didn't touch her, but their presence was an unmistakable command. Humiliated, with the eyes of every passenger boring into her, Brenda Jensen was escorted down the stairs and off the plane she had, for so long, considered her domain. Her career was over. Sterling turned back to Robert, his professional, apologetic demeanor returning instantly. "Dr. Hayes, we have a Gulfstream G650 waiting for you and your daughter. It's fully fueled and flight planned for London City Airport, which will be faster for you than Heathrow. Your luggage, including the sensitive item, will be transferred immediately. It will be in the air within the hour. We hope this will be sufficient to rectify the situation and ensure your mission is successful." Robert looked at the exhausted, apologetic executive. He looked at his daughter, who was now watching the proceedings with wide, confused eyes. He felt no triumph, only a deep, profound weariness. "It will suffice," Robert said simply. He and Maya were escorted off the commercial airliner, leaving behind a plane full of 200 bewildered passengers who would be delayed for hours. They were led to a gleaming private jet, where a new crew greeted them with smiles and extreme deference. As he settled Maya into a seat far plusher and more luxurious than the one he'd fought to occupy, Robert felt the full weight of the incident settle upon him. He had won. He had protected the mission. But the victory felt hollow. The joy and excitement of their daddy-daughter adventure had been irrevocably tainted. As their private jet lifted off, banking sharply and climbing into the sky, Sarah Jenkins watched from the window of the grounded Flight 118. She had the names. She had the timeline. She had eyewitness accounts from a dozen passengers. She had a quote from the businessman in 3D who said, "I've never seen anything like it." She treated him like a criminal from the moment he stepped on board. She began to write her opening paragraph. For Brenda Jensen, a 30-year veteran flight attendant, seat 2A on Global Skyways, Flight 118 was a seat of suspicion. For its occupant, Dr. Robert Hayes, a world-renowned neuroscientist on a life-saving mission, it became a battlefield. The battle ended not with a whimper, but with a phone call that brought a multi-million-dollar airliner to a screeching halt, exposing the deep-seated prejudice that can fester even at 35,000 feet. The story she knew would be explosive, and she had no idea that the final, most devastating chapter had yet to be written. 6 months passed. The world, for the most part, moved on. Sarah Jenkins' article, published in a major online magazine and syndicated globally, went viral. It was titled "The Grounded Goliath: How One Man's Dignity Held an Airline Hostage." The story sparked a firestorm. Global Skyways stock took a temporary but significant hit. They issued a public apology, fired Richard Sterling for his handling of the initial non-response, and implemented a mandatory, company-wide diversity and inclusion retraining program. The FAA launched an investigation. For a few weeks, Dr. Robert Hayes and Brenda Jensen were names at the center of a media frenzy. Robert, fiercely private, refused all interviews, issuing a single statement through his lawyers expressing his desire to return to his work and his life. His trip to London had been a success. The phage culture had arrived safely, and the experimental surgery on the diplomat's son was a groundbreaking triumph, paving the way for a new line of treatment. He and Maya had even managed to salvage the last few days of their trip, finding joy in the Tower of London and the West End, but the shadow of the flight lingered. For Brenda Jensen, however, there was no moving on. The shadow was her new reality. At 58, she was unemployable. The story was too public, her name too toxic. The disgraced racist flight attendant was not a resume that opened doors. Her 30 years of seniority, her pension, her flight benefits, all gone. She lost her apartment in Queens, forced to sell what she could, and move into the cramped spare bedroom of her younger sister Carol in suburban New Jersey. The days bled into a bitter, monotonous rhythm of scrolling through job sites, watching daytime television, and nursing a potent cocktail of resentment and self-pity. In her mind, she was the victim. She was a scapegoat, a casualty of a world gone too politically correct. She blamed Robert Hayes for his arrogance. She blamed Kevin for not backing her up. She blamed Captain Foster for his weakness and Sterling for his corporate cowardice. She blamed the journalist, Sarah Jenkins, for ruining her life. The one person she never truly blamed was herself. The prejudice she held was so deeply ingrained, she didn't even recognize it as such. To her, it was just instinct, a gut feeling she'd honed over 30 years. Her sister Carol, a kind, overworked nursing home aide, tried to be patient. But Brenda's bitterness was a corrosive presence in the small house, a cloud of gloom that was hard to escape. The real buffer between the sisters, the light of the household, was Carol's 10-year-old son, Leo. Leo was a bright, funny kid who loved building complex Lego creations and reading books about astrophysics. But for the past year, a sinister shadow had been growing over him. He was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of pediatric glioma, a brain tumor that defied conventional treatments. Chemotherapy had ravaged his small body, but barely slowed the tumor's growth. Radiation was deemed too risky. They had run out of options, and Leo's doctors had given him less than a year. Their only hope was a sliver, a near impossibility, getting into a highly exclusive clinical trial for a new experimental therapy. It was being run out of a specialist center in London, but a sister program was being established in New York. The therapy was radical, using genetically engineered viruses to attack cancer cells. It was the absolute cutting edge of oncology, and the waiting list was a mile long, filled with desperate families from all over the world. Carol had filled out the paperwork months ago, a Hail Mary pass into the dark. One dreary November afternoon, while Brenda was staring blankly at the television, the phone rang. It was Carol, her voice choked with a frantic, joyful sob. "Brenda, are you sitting down? We got in. We got the call. Leo got a spot." Brenda sat up, her own problems momentarily forgotten. "A spot in the trial?" "Yes, the New York trial." "Oh my God, Brenda, it's a miracle. We have a preliminary consultation next week. They think he's a perfect candidate. He has a chance, Bren. He really has a chance." Through her tears, Carol relayed the details. The consultation was at a prestigious research hospital in Manhattan. They would meet the team, discuss the procedure, and begin the pre-trial workups. Hope, a feeling long absent from the house, flooded back in an overwhelming, brilliant wave. "Who's running it?" Brenda asked, caught up in the emotion. What's the doctor's name? Oh, he's supposed to be the best in the world at this, Carol said, her voice filled with reverence. It's his research, his invention. The hospital said we are so lucky to have him leading the U.S. team. His name is, let me see, they sent an email, Dr. Robert Hayes. The name hit Brenda like a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Dr. Robert Hayes. Dr. Robert Hayes. It couldn't be. It was a common enough name. It had to be a different person? A coincidence. Her hands shaking, she fumbled for her old cracked smartphone. She typed the name into the search bar, along with glioma trial and New York. The screen filled with articles. There he was, the same calm, intelligent face that had stared back at her with such unnerving composure on the plane. The articles lauded him. Pioneering neuro-oncologist Dr. Robert Hayes to lead U.S. arm of groundbreaking ethyl-red biologics phage therapy trial. They called him a genius, a visionary, a lifesaver. Brenda dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, the screen shattering further. It was him, the man she had humiliated, accused of being a criminal, and tried to have removed from his flight. The man whose daughter she had made cry. The man whose life she had, through the viral news story, made a living hell for weeks. That man, Dr. Robert Hayes, was the one person on earth who held her nephew's life in his hands. The irony was so cruel, so perfectly, viciously targeted, it was almost poetic. It wasn't just karma, it was a cosmic joke, and she was the punchline. All her bitterness, all her blame, all her self-pity collapsed in an instant, replaced by a cold, gut-wrenching terror. She had tried to ruin the life of the one man who could save the person she loved most in the world. The 6 days leading up to the consultation were a masterclass in psychological torture for Brenda Jensen. Sleep offered no escape, as her dreams were haunted by the cramped, pressurized atmosphere of the Global Skyway's first-class cabin. She would jolt awake in the pre-dawn darkness of her sister's spare room, the scent of stale air and her own panicked sweat filling her nostrils, the imagined hiss of people like you echoing in her ears. During the day, she was a ghost adrift in a house buzzing with a fragile, electric hope she felt she had no right to witness, let alone share. Her sister Carol was a whirlwind of purpose. She spent hours on the phone with the insurance company, her voice a determined, insistent drone. She created a binder, thick with Leo's medical records, each page a testament to a year of fear and fighting. She spoke of Dr. Robert Hayes with a reverence usually reserved for saints. They say he can see pathways that other doctors miss, she'd say to Brenda over coffee, her eyes shining. He's not just a surgeon, he's a pioneer. Each word of praise was a hot coal on Brenda's soul. She would nod, offer a weak smile, and feel a piece of herself wither and die. The house, once heavy with the oppressive gloom of Leo's prognosis, now felt light. Leo himself, buoyed by his mother's optimism, seemed to have more energy. He spent hours meticulously constructing a Lego replica of the Starship Enterprise, the quiet clicks of the plastic bricks a sound of nascent joy. Brenda would watch him from the doorway, her heart a tangled knot of love and terror. This bright, beautiful boy, whose world was constricted by his illness, was pinning all his hope on a man she had treated as less than human. The irony was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest and making it difficult to breathe. Her mind raced through impossible scenarios. Could she call the hospital anonymously and warn them? Warn them of what? That the aunt of a patient was a horrible person? Could she feign a sudden illness to avoid the trip, to avoid the possibility of a chance encounter? But the thought of Carol and Leo going alone, ignorant of the potential danger she represented, was even more terrifying. She was trapped. She replayed the confrontation on the plane endlessly, not as a memory, but as a deposition against herself. Every smug glance, every condescending word, every ounce of her misplaced authority now seemed monstrous. The self-righteousness that had fueled her actions had curdled into a thick, choking shame. For 30 years, she had told herself she was a good judge of character. Now she understood she was just a vessel for a quiet, ugly prejudice she had refused to name. The day of the appointment dawned cold and relentlessly gray, a perfect mirror of her internal landscape. She insisted on driving. A small act of penance. The journey into Manhattan was silent, the car a bubble of disparate emotions. Carol radiated nervous excitement, tapping a rhythm on her knee. Leo was quiet, staring out at the passing scenery, lost in his own 10-year-old thoughts about doctors and spaceships and the bad guys in his head. Brenda gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, her focus entirely on not screaming. The hospital was a city unto itself, a sprawling complex of glass and steel dedicated to the war between hope and despair. The pediatric oncology wing was painted in deceptively cheerful colors, with cartoon animals on the walls that did little to mask the palpable anxiety of the parents in the waiting room. Brenda felt like an intruder, a contamination. "I'll just wait in the cafeteria," she mumbled to Carol. "Get a coffee. You text me when you're done." It was an act of cowardice, and she knew it. She found a small, sticky table in a corner of the cavernous cafeteria and nursed a bitter, lukewarm coffee for what felt like a lifetime. Every doctor in scrubs who walked past made her heart leap into her throat. She imagined the scene upstairs. Dr. Hayes reading Leo's file, his brow furrowing as he gets to the family section. Jensen, Carol Jensen. Would the name trigger the memory? Would he make the connection? Would his face harden, his promise of care dissolving into cold, professional detachment? She pictured him telling Carol, "I'm sorry, upon review, your son is not a suitable candidate." The thought was so horrifying it made her nauseous. Just as her anxiety reached its peak, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Carol. "All done. Heading down. It was amazing. Meet us by the main entrance." Brenda found them standing near the revolving doors, bathed in the weak afternoon light. And the first thing she saw was that Leo was beaming, a genuine, unforced smile of pure delight. He was clutching a small, intricate, 3D printed model of a virus, its geometric head and spindly legs looking like a lunar lander. "Aunt Bren, look what he gave me," Leo shouted, thrusting the model forward. "This is a bacteriophage. Dr. Hayes said it's a real-life superhero, like a tiny spaceship that's programmed to find only the bad guys in my brain and leave the good guys alone. He said me and him are on the same team now. He's so cool." Carol was openly weeping, but they were tears of overwhelming relief, her hand resting on Leo's shoulder as if to anchor herself. "Oh, Bren," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "You should have seen him. He wasn't like the other doctors. He knelt to be at eye level with Leo. He listened, really listened. He explained the science to a 10-year-old without once being condescending. He said Leo's courage is a key factor in trials like this." She took a ragged breath. "He said he's optimistic. For the first time in a year, Bren, I feel like we can breathe. He's given us hope." That was the breaking point. The dam of Brenda's fear and shame didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The image of this brilliant, kind man kneeling to speak to her nephew, the very man she had sneered at and tried to eject from a place he belonged, was too much to bear. A raw, guttural sob tore from her throat, shocking herself, Carol, and a passing orderly. It was the sound of a spirit collapsing under the weight of its own hypocrisy. "Brenda! Brenda, what's wrong?" Carol asked, her joy instantly replaced by alarm. "Are you in pain? What is it?" I... Brenda tried to speak, but the words were tangled with sobs. She pulled her sister away from Leo, who was now looking on with wide, worried eyes. In a torrent of whispered, broken sentences, the whole sordid story came out. She confessed everything. The 3 ID checks, the accusation of fraud, the venomous hiss of "people like you," the smug satisfaction she'd felt when calling for his removal, the public humiliation she had caused him in front of his own child. Carol listened, her face moving through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Utter confusion, then disbelief, then a slow, sickening dawning of horror. The light in her eyes extinguished, replaced by a deep, profound sadness. She didn't get angry. She didn't yell. She just looked utterly defeated, as if Brenda had confessed to poisoning their only well. "Oh, Brenda," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of a shared history in a new terrible wound. "What did you do?" I have to fix it, Brenda choked out, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I have to talk to him. I can't let my ugliness be the reason Leo doesn't get this chance. Leaving Carol to comfort a now confused Leo, Brenda turned and marched back into the hospital, a soldier heading toward her own execution. She took the elevator to the oncology floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. She approached the nurse's station, her voice a reedy tremor as she asked if it was possible to have a private word with Dr. Hayes. My name is Brenda Jensen. The nurse, a woman with kind but weary eyes, looked at her, and a flicker of recognition crossed her face. The story had been everywhere. After a brief, quiet call, the nurse gave her a sympathetic look. Dr. Hayes can spare a few minutes. He said you can wait in the family quiet room at the end of the hall. The room was small and sterile, furnished with a pair of uncomfortable-looking armchairs and decorated with bland abstract art. It smelled of bleach and fear. It was a room designed for receiving bad news. Brenda stood in the center of it, waiting, her entire life seeming to narrow to this single point. A few minutes later, Dr. Robert Hayes walked in. He had changed from his suit into blue scrubs, a stethoscope slung casually around his neck. He looked older than she remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, etched by long hours and the burden of his work. He saw her, and his motion hesitated for a barest fraction of a second. A guarded, weary look crossed his face before being replaced by a mask of professional neutrality. He remembered. Of course he remembered. Brenda's legs felt weak. Dr. Hayes, she began, her voice cracking. I am Leo Jensen's aunt. I'm Carol's sister. Robert nodded slowly, his face impassive, his dark eyes watching her intently. I made the connection. The dam broke again. I don't know where to begin, she stammered, twisting her hands together. There aren't words to say how sorry I am. What I did to you on that flight, it was despicable. There is no excuse. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't a mistake. It was ugly and it was wrong, and it was born from a prejudice in me that I didn't even have the decency to admit I had. I looked at you and your beautiful daughter, and I made a judgment. I tried to humiliate you. I wanted to hurt you, and I did. I scared your child, and for that, I will never, ever forgive myself. Tears were streaming down her face, dripping onto her blouse. I read the articles. I saw what you went through afterwards, and I am so sorry. I'm not here asking you to forgive me. I'm not here asking for anything. I had to look you in the eye and tell you that what I did was monstrous. And I have to ask you, please, what I did, please don't let it affect Leo. He's just a little boy. He's a good boy. Please don't punish him for having me in his family. She finally ran out of words, standing before him, stripped of all her pride, her defenses, her self-deception. She was just a terrified, ashamed woman, begging for a mercy she did not deserve. Robert was silent for a long moment, simply watching her, letting her words hang in the sterile air. He wasn't gloating. There was no triumph in his eyes. There was only a profound, heartbreaking sadness. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but it filled the small room. Ms. Jensen, he said, and the name was formal, but not cold. I am a doctor. I took an oath. That oath requires me to dedicate my life to the service of humanity, to practice my profession with conscience and dignity, and to ensure that the health of my patient is my first consideration. It does not say, except for the nephews of people who have wronged me. He took a step closer, and his expression softened from neutrality into something more human, more tired. What happened on that flight was deeply painful. Seeing the fear in my daughter's eyes because of the actions of another adult, that is a pain I would not wish on anyone. It was a reminder that for some people, my degrees, my accomplishments, my humanity will always be secondary to their perception of my skin color. But Miss Jensen, that pain belongs to me. It does not belong in an operating room. It has no place in a clinical trial. He looked her directly in the eye, and for the first time, she saw not the victim of her prejudice, but the full measure of the man. Your nephew, Leo, is a 10-year-old child with a glioblastoma. He is fighting a battle that most adults could not endure. He is my patient. He qualifies for this trial because of his medical condition, his pathology, and his own incredible strength. He will receive the absolute best care that I and my entire team are capable of giving. He will receive the same care I would demand for my own daughter. Your relationship to him is, from a medical standpoint, completely irrelevant. His words were not a reprieve, they were an indictment. The sheer force of his integrity, of his unwavering professionalism, was a mirror reflecting her own pettiness, and the image was hideous. This was the true karma, not revenge but the crushing weight of his grace. He sighed, a sound of deep weariness. Your sister is terrified. Your nephew is trying to be brave for her. They are going through the worst ordeal of their lives. They need you. They need their family to be a source of strength, not a source of shame. He paused. Go back to them, Ms. Jensen. Be the person they need you to be right now. He gave her a final brief nod, turned and left the room, the soft squeak of his shoes on the linoleum fading down the hall. Brenda sank into one of the chairs, her body trembling. The weight of her secret had been lifted, only to be replaced by something far heavier. The certain knowledge that she had been judged not by her worst actions, but by the quiet, unassailable goodness of the man she had tried to tear down. And that was a burden she would have to carry for the rest of her life. In the end, this isn't just a story about a grounded flight. It's a story about the baggage we all carry. Dr. Robert Hayes carried a briefcase with a life-saving cure, but he also carried the weight of a world that too often judged him before it knew him. Brenda Jensen carried a 30-year career, but also a quiet prejudice that cost her everything. The ultimate karma wasn't her firing, but the terrifying moment she realized her nephew's only hope was the very man she had dehumanized. His response, one of pure grace and professionalism, became her true punishment and her only path to redemption. This story, based on a blend of real-life accounts of flying while black and the unseen dramas of the medical world, shows how quickly our lives can intersect in the most unexpected ways. If this story moved you, please hit the like button, share it with someone you think needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, real-life stories. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know in the comments below.